can. Each man must do his bit.
Welcome to another edition of The Public Interest. My name is David Granger, and on this series of programs, we examine matters which concern the entire Guyanese public. And today we look at the question of the Caribbean community. The Caribbean community celebrates its 50th anniversary on the 4th of July. It was founded on the 4th of July, 1973. And today, soon it'll be the 50th anniversary. Many of you may know the story behind that anniversary. Of course, the 4th of July has nothing to do with American independence. It was the day in 1967 when Forbes Burnham flew to what was then the Barbadian airport. It was then called Sewell before it became Grantley Adams Airport. In fact, I think it was 1965. And the plane landed at Sewell Airport in Barbados on the 4th of July. And those two friends, Forbes Burnham and Earl Barrow, started to think about Caribbean unity, and they invited a third person from Antigua, Vera Bird. And later on, of course, the CARIFESTA was established, and then in 1973, CARICOM was established. And that's the story behind the 4th of July. It has nothing to do with the U.S. independence. It has to do with the fact that four founding fathers, Forbes Burnham, Earl Barrow, Michael Manley, and Eric Williams, who was then the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, they had a common vision to protect the new states, because those were the only four independent states in 1973. And they had a common vision to protect the new states from the jeopardy, the peril, the dangers of becoming economically marginalized in the new world. Of course, in the 1960s and 70s, so many former colonies were becoming independent. And these four visionary Caribbean leaders, heads of government, took the bold step to set up what became known as CARICOM. And they had a common vision. They wanted to fulfill the people. So because we were all poor, we're still poor, and we had hopes of full employment. We had hopes of having a good life and having improved standards of living. And as a result of that, Forbes Burnham, in 1967, he called upon Caribbean leaders to bring about some sort of regional integration, not as an option, but as an obligation if we were to fulfill this dream of giving the Caribbean people a good life. And Caribbean leaders heeded that advice of Forbes Burnham, and they established CARIFTA in 1968. Many of you will be familiar with the expression CARIFTA. And of course, you know about CARIFESTA, and so there's a great avenue in CARIFESTA Avenue in North Georgetown, which is adorned with the flags of the CARICOM states. And we celebrate the 50th anniversary. But we must also, as we celebrate our anniversary, we must ask ourselves whether CARICOM has fulfilled its mission, its vision of those four founding fathers, who of course are all dead now. But they have left a legacy of hope. Hope is not a strategy, but we must see where CARICOM has gone, and perhaps what the present generation could do to move the CARICOM vision further, to fulfill that CARICOM vision. CARICOM is not easy. The Caribbean states, the English-speaking Caribbean states, that is before Suriname came on board, or before Haiti came on board. The English-speaking Caribbean states extended over a space of 2,640,000 square kilometers of sea. 2,640,000 square kilometers of sea. Georgetown is 2,374 kilometers from Kingston in Jamaica. And then, as now, we simply did not have the aviation and the maritime transport, which is essential to moving goods and people. So you can see with that tremendous amount of space and the lack of aviation and maritime, and most of the states are islands. So you had to get aircraft or boats to traverse the Caribbean. So commerce and communication, to start with, were inadequate or non-existent. And in addition to that, we know about the legendary, what do you call the limitations or the catastrophes which have beset Caribbean community states. They're very vulnerable. Most of them are very vulnerable to natural disasters. Some have had hurricanes and different forms of catastrophe triggered to some extent by climate change. And in particular, Haiti has had perhaps the worst amount of disasters than any other Caribbean state that I can think of. And those climatic and geographical other hurdles have made the Caribbean a very difficult country, in perhaps the second most difficult country in the entire world in terms of susceptibility to disaster. And this is not something that can easily be overcome. It's a fact of life. And as global climate warming increases, the frequency and the ferocity of hurricanes and other storms in the Caribbean will also increase. So it's not something we can escape from. So when we speak about the Caribbean community, we're not just speaking about the great geographical space, but we're also speaking about the fact that that geographical space is particularly susceptible to climate change and of course, natural disasters. And in the entire globe, the Caribbean is the second most prone to disasters. As a result of that, food production is very frequently inhibited, very frequently reduced, simply because sometimes if the main crop is bananas, one hurricane could wipe out the entire banana crop. And over a period of time, the Caribbean has become a net importer of food. That is, it imports more food than it produces or exports. And it means that whatever it produces needs to be sold just to pay for food to feed its working population. So food security should mean that everyone, everywhere in the country, in the region, should have adequate access to enough food and nutritious food. That is what food security is all about. When we speak about food security, we mean that everyone, everywhere in the country or in the Caribbean should have adequate and nutritious food. But most CARICOM states import at least 50% or 60% of the food that they consume. Some import at least 80% of the food they use. That is why, as we celebrate CARICOM Day, we must understand that over the last 50 years, we have not really been able to make the region food secure. And as a result of that, you can imagine that the states, particularly through the CARICOM Secretariat, have had to pay a lot of attention to the question of food security. And when you look at the environmental disasters, when you look at the absence of assets of infrastructure and so on, when you look at the overexploitation of natural resources, don't forget the British have been exploiting some of these Caribbean islands for nearly 400 years. and soils have been depleted, and there are other environmental issues. Uh, in the world at large, food prices have been, unstable, tending to go up, not go down, and also food production. As you know, people always speak about the war in Ukraine, which is a major grain producer in Europe, in the world. And there are other obstacles to trade. Some countries still use outdated technologies, and there are problems of pests. And as a result of that, there is very little innovation. Even a country like Guyana, is actually very little innovation. I think when you go west to the Essequibo and you look at the way food is produced, you'd see that technology hasn't penetrated deeply or widely. Some states too are susceptible to international indebtedness, high importation. Many of the talented people leave the country, what they call a brain drain, simply because the countries are very small, the economies are small, and they go to North America or Europe. And even people in the countryside whose families might have traditionally been involved in agriculture, have been caught in a net of urbanization, what they call the rural-urban drift. Many people who grew up in the countryside, when they become lawyers and doctors and attorney and accountants and so on, tend to go and work in the towns as rural-urban. So it means that the countryside, which produces the food, is deprived of the sort of brain power as they used to depend on in the past for innovation and production. We therefore need to look at what is happening in CARICOM. Given that scenario, what is happening in the Caribbean in terms of production? The region has been struggling with this idea of food security for a very long time. And from 1989, I think we can go back to what is called the Grandance Declaration. Then here in Guyana, we had the Lilienthal Declaration in 2009. We had a regional food and nutrition survey in 2010. We had the CAP, the Caribbean Agriculture Policy, in 2011. We had regional dialogue in food systems in 2021. We had, the COVID-19 Food Security and Livelihood Impact Survey. And all of these plans have been drafted over the years by a very efficient CARICOM secretariat. So why have the plans not worked? If we have such a dedicated team of public servants, and I think we had some of the finest public servants in the entire region, people like William DeMass and Edwin Carrington, Alistair McIntyre. These were Caribbean greats, and they worked on producing plans which, if implemented by the politicians, would have placed the Caribbean people at a high level of food security. But that's another matter. Within the last 3 years or so, we have had lots of promising. We have a promising administration. We have a lot of promises. And there's been quite a bit of promising also, because Guyana's president, as you know, there's something called a quasi-cabinet, or the Americans say quasi-cabinet, in which every head of government has responsibility. The responsibility for agriculture is the Guyanese head of government, head of state. They call him the lead. He's the lead head on agriculture. And as I said, we have a very promising administration. When Guyana went to the CELAC summit in 2021, we promised to provide strong leadership on food security. We promised to establish a voluntary fund to facilitate regional disaster response. We promised to open lands for interregional agricultural development and investment. We promised to implement the business-to-business, B2B, you remember that? B2B platform. We promised a government-to-government portal, G2G, Yeah, we're good at these promises. B2B and G2G. We attended the uh, United Nations Food Systems Summit in 2021. Also, we promised to transform our food production system and involve the regional private sector. Again, in 2021, we promised to work to dismantle the barriers to interregional trade. As you could see from the current newspapers, we're still battling to get Guyanese honey into the other Caribbean countries, and so is Grenada. Well, good luck. Um, we have been attending meetings all over the world, promising to make regional food security a priority. We've had an Agri-Fest in Bridgetown last year. We promised to make lands available for young people to farm, and we hosted Agri-Forum and Expo last year. We promised to lead in reducing CARICOM food import bill by 2025. Um, as I said, we have a promising administration. But you must judge whether these promises have been fulfilled or if they can be fulfilled. My friends, there's something called the Common Agriculture Policy, CAP, which was drafted by CARICOM experts in the CARICOM Secretariat in 2011. It's a good policy. That is 12 years ago. And in my view, if those proposals in CAP 2011 were implemented, we would be in a better place. Now, what is CAP about? CAP is a master plan. It is a master plan for food security. In fact, I believe that if CARICOM achieved nothing else but CAP, we would have been a success. I don't know what the heads of government are going to say on this 50th anniversary, but I would say that if we can achieve the goals of CAP, the Common Agriculture Policy, CARICOM would have been a success. Whether it is security coordination or foreign policy coordination or regional security system, food. Every day, our citizens want food. And if we can feed every CARICOM citizen, CARICOM would be a success. But that's another matter. There is a master plan. And over the last 12 years, we have, I think, failed to implement what is required to produce our food. We're still importing 50%, 60% of the amounts of our food. Maybe only Belize, Guyana, and Haiti can claim to be reasonably on the way to achieving food security. But as a whole, we're not food secure. We have proposed many regional and national policies for food security, but with little success. States should now aim to remove non-trade barriers. And this is a big problem. And these are not barriers posed by lack of aviation or transportation or shipping. These are political barriers, non-trade barriers. We need to increase intra-regional trade, open our markets so that other countries' products, other Caribbean countries' products can enter our country. And our products can enter other Caribbean countries. So our common agriculture policy should aim at increasing the volume, the supply of food, at reducing the amount of food that is actually imported, at intensifying processing, agro-processing industries, institutionalizing agriculture education and training for young people to improve their skills and research capabilities, and also introducing a comprehensive land use strategy to produce the specific crops that we need to make the Caribbean food secure. My friends, many of you are housewives. You go to the market, and many housewives have told me, and you can look at the statistics, it is cheaper to buy an imported apple than a local mango. It is cheaper to buy an imported white potato than a local sweet potato. And when that starts to happen, it means that local producers and farmers will be pushed out of the market, and importers and businessmen will take over the market by bringing cheap apples and cheap potatoes and other foodstuffs onto the market. It's now sometimes it's been easier to buy Brazilian tomatoes than local tomatoes. So that is the situation that we find ourselves in. Unless the cap is put into place, unless the Caribbean common agriculture policy is put into place seriously, we will not be able to make the region food secure. The long and short of the story is that the common agriculture policy has not been effectively executed. It's a beautiful document, very promising, but to say that CARICOM set itself a target to reduce food imports by 2025, which is 18 months away, by 25%, what is called 25 by 20 by 5, 25 in 5, is a bit of fiction. To make it possible, it is desirable. It is desirable that we should introduce this plan, 25 in 5, reduce our imports by 25% in 5 years. But from the time that promise was made, the clock has been ticking. And in 18 months' time, it will be 2025. And you judge whether we've been able to reduce our imports by 25%. But what have we seen? What we've seen is that billions of dollars are being pumped into sugar, and it is difficult to say what has been the impact so far. We hear about experiments with roses. Roses are beautiful, but they're not edible. We hear about land being made available for hemp. Again, there's some people in Guyana who perforate a different type of hemp, a different species, but people don't eat that. We hear about experiments with wheat. But what people want is cheap plantains, cheap sweet potatoes, cheap yam and meadows, cheap cassava. And you don't hear about that. You hear about, hemp, roses, shrimp, wheat. And the hungry masses remain hungry. And roses won't fill their bellies. We therefore come to the question of what purposes CARICOM serve if it cannot satisfy the food and nutritional needs of its citizens. In my view, CARICOM food security, or the CAP, the Common Agriculture Policy. Look, I'm not talking about high science, I'm talking about feeding people every day of their lives. CARICOM food security and CAP, the Common Agriculture Policy, should rest on 4 pillars. You may have views of your own, but the first pillar, not the only pillar, the first pillar is infrastructure. Farm to market access is inadequate. There is insufficient transportation infrastructure in terms of aviation, highways, shipping, and sea freight, and also refrigeration. There is inadequate irrigation in a country like Guyana, and there is, and that inadequacy leads to farm to market losses and wastage. Farmers also suffer from low prices for their produce, and this calls for a review of information technology, and that should be should not be limited to producing locally for local markets, but we should be able to produce for a foreign market as well. But farmers need to have that information if they're going to produce commodities for Barbados and Trinidad. There needs to be innovation. Um, there needs to be an increased use of science and technology in research and in agricultural development and the production and processing of foods. And there needs to be more investment. For CAP to work, for 25 in 5 to work, we need 7.5 billion US dollars investment. Now, whether the Caribbean could generate that amount of money in 18 months is left to be seen. 18 months, that's all we have for this 25 by 25. My friends, CAP failed in 2011. It failed in 2005. We do not want it to fail now. Our citizens are hungry. That is, we don't want roses, we don't want hemp. Our citizens want food. Our children are underfed. Ships are unloading containers of foreign food in our ports. After 50 years, CARICOM needs investment, it needs infrastructure, it needs innovation, and needs information technology. The big question is, now that we celebrate our 50th anniversary as a community, will CARICOM ever be able to feed itself and fulfill its citizens' desire of food and nutrition so that everybody can have a good life? That is a question we ask ourselves on this CARICOM Day 2023 as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Caribbean community. Thank you, and may God bless you. Huh? Are you in GPS?